Hello, everyone. After talking about oogenesis and folliculogenesis, the formation of the female gamete, the oocyte, we have to go to chapter 15, which is talking about the regulation of the female sexual hormones, the importance of the female hormones, and how do they affect the sexual activity in a female. First, we have to take a look or to make a revision for the female reproductive system. And we have to take into consideration each organ and a little revision for its role. The ovary, which is responsible for the production of the female gamete, the oocyte, in addition for the secretion of the female sexual hormones. The fallopian tube, which is the organ or the tube that receives the oocyte from the ovary, and it's the site of fertilization. I mean, when the oocyte is released from the ovary, will remain here in the fallopian tube, waiting a sperm cell to come and to reach for the fertilization to take place. The uterus, which is the organ of implantation, the organ of the development of an embryo once fertilization took place, and the vagina for sure, which is the organ of copulation and where the sperm cells are deposited here once a relation took place and the sperm cells can pass in order to reach the released oocyte for fertilization to take place. So, because we are talking about these organs, we are going to focus first on the uterus and the parts which is made up of. The uterus, the organ of implantation of an embryo, the organ of the development. First of all, you have to know that it has a pear shape like this, and also it's a muscular organ. It's made up of three layers. The outer layer, which is the perimetrium, the middle layer, which is known as myometrium, and the inner layer, which is known as endometrium. The only layer we are interested for today is the endometrium. Why I'm interested in the endometrium or the inner layer? Because it's the layer important for the implantation and the layer which helps the embryo to develop and to become a fully baby inside the uterus. For this purpose, we have to take all the modification or to study all the modifications that take place within this endometrium. We can't talk about modification or changes in a female without mentioning a cycle because we have to know that all the modifications and the changes take place in a cyclic manner or a cyclic way. When I say a cycle, I have to take a typical cycle which is made up of 28 days. So we are going to study the modifications of the endometrium. How does this layer change within a cycle? To facilitate our work all the time, we have to divide the cycle into two. So, and to stop at day 14. Why day 14 of the cycle? Day 14 is the day of ovulation, the day of the release of the oocyte from the ovary into the fallopian tube. So, before ovulation is, or there is a change, and after ovulation, there is something else, and another changes have to be taken into consideration. So, because we are talking about the uterus and mainly the modification of the endometrium, we can say that it is a uterine cycle or endometrial cycle. Before ovulation, we have to talk about two phases in the endometrial cycle. First phase is the menstrual phase. What do we mean by menstrual phase? Menstrual phase is characterized by menstruation, which is a bleeding. So the female can recognize her first day of her cycle by first day of bleeding, first day of menstruation. So once she bleeds, she can put her first day of her cycle. Usually, the bleeding takes place within 5 to 7 days. So, when menstruation takes place and it's over around 5 to 7 days, the female or the endometrial cycle enters with the second phase, which is the proliferative phase. Proliferative phase is characterized by thickening of the endometrium. So, as you see here, the endometrium becomes thicker and becomes rich in certain structures. So, day 14 is the day of ovulation. After this, we have to call this phase a secretory phase. In secretory phase, as you see also, the endometrium becomes thicker and thicker. All of this is known as a menstrual cycle or endometrial cycle or uterine cycle. It shows the changes of the endometrium within the 28 days of the female's cycle. All of these we have to put in mind all the time. They take place in order to make a pregnancy possible. So if you ask yourself, why does the endometrium follow these changes or modifications? For a clear purpose, which is purpose of making the pregnancy possible. That's why we have to look for the importance of these modifications. During menstruation, as you see, only what do we have is sloughing, a decrease in the endometrium. So, and the bleeding occur. Now, after this, we have to go for the proliferative phase. Proliferative phase, which is proliferation. So, an increase in endometrial cells. The endometrial cells, by mitosis, they increase in number, and the thickness of the endometrium increases. In addition, we start to observe something known as tube-like gland. What are these glands? These glands are important for the development of the embryo by giving the certain or important nutritive substances which ensure the development of the embryo. Because, as we all know, the fertilized cell or the fertilized egg is still small enough to survive without these nutritive substances. So the endometrium has to ensure them or to give these nutritive substances by these glands, which are very important for the development. So, ovulation takes place, and if fertilization occurs, directly the endometrium has to provide this fertilized egg with these nutritive substances, and that's why the tube-like glands become deeper and more developed to provide more nutritive substances. In addition, more and more, as you see here, blood vessels. So these blood vessels, they take the spiral shape, and the endometrium becomes very rich in these blood vessels because, as you know, also the blood gives the oxygen, gives the nutritive substances, and it helps in the survival of the embryo. And the endometrium increases in thickness more and more. It thickens till maximum here with a very developed tube-like gland and spiral vessels. This structure during the secretory phase is known as uterine lace. So, once the uterine lace is observed, we can determine that the female is in her secretory phase. So, if fertilization takes place and an embryo has to develop, for sure the thickness has to continue or to keep its size and survives the embryo. But another question, what about the oocyte if it is not fertilized? So if there is no fertilization, meaning that no embryo, no need for the development, and no need for keeping this thickness in this way. That's why at the end of the cycle, which is day 28, if there is no fertilization, the endometrium has to keep its structure again by thinning again and sloughing this layer, which is the endometrial layer, and bleeding occurs again, and the blood vessels rupture and sloughing, as I said, for this layer takes place, and menstruation occurs and bleeding take place. So you have to study very well the importance of the uterine lace and the importance of these modifications in the uterine cycle or the endometrium in specific in order to know why do they have to occur. For sure here we have to ask ourselves a very important question. As you see, the endometrium changes and follows modification, but what controls these modifications? In order to know who controls this endometrium and the uterus, we have the following experiment, and for sure you have it in your book, page 296, so you can follow also using your book. Okay. The first lot we used, or we followed an experiment with a mouse, which is known as a control mouse, having ovaries. So the result is cyclic development of the endometrium. So the development occurs. In contrast to the second one, lot 2, where there is no development of the endometrium when the ovaries are ablated. Yani when we have bilateral ovarectomy, we have removal of both ovaries. So, no development without ovaries, development with ovaries. So, as an indication, we can find or we can say that directly the ovaries, what do? They stimulate the cyclic development of the endometrium. The endometrium is controlled by the ovaries. On the other hand, when these ovaries are ablated or we have ovarectomy, but the ovary is grafted again under the skin, but in another place, the result is similar to the first one when we have ovaries naturally, cyclic development of the endometrium. So, what does this mean? This means that the ovaries act on the endometrium, but the location is not necessary for sure, so that's why it acts via blood. Moreover, when there is ovarectomy of the ovaries, for sure, ablation of the ovaries, but with an injection with ovarian extract. When I say ovarian extract, I mean the juice which is taken from the ovary. There is development similarly like lot 1. There is development of the endometrium, but in contrast without any cyclic variation. So, as an indication, we can group our indications now. So the ovaries stimulate the development of the endometrium and it acts on the endometrium via a blood, but also we can say that it secretes a chemical substances that are hormones and they are discharged in the blood in a periodic way. Periodic way means that not continuous. So let's go to the ovary now in order to know how does it control the endometrium. Before knowing or talking about the hormones that we found in our experiment, we have to take a look for the ovary itself, and within the same time, same cycle, from day 0 or day 1 of the cycle till day 28, what's going on in the ovary. And now we have to mention this changes or modifications that we are observing here as ovarian cycle. So we talked about endometrial cycle, but for sure we have to talk or to mention the ovarian cycle also. Let's see. From the beginning of the cycle, the ovarian cycle is characterized by follicular phase. So, what is follicular phase? Follicular phase is when the tertiary follicle enters the cycle. So, the cycle starts with tertiary follicle. The tertiary follicle now, within the follicular phase, develop and becomes bigger and bigger to develop into a Graafian follicle. When I say Graafian, I say, or we can say that it's the mature follicle. Mature follicle containing the oocyte, which is ready now to be released. So, till day 14, which is the day of ovulation, follicular phase now is ended. How? When the Graafian, just at the day 14, day of ovulation, ruptures, and when it ruptures, it has to release the oocyte. But which oocyte? We know that all the time the follicles and the tertiary reaching the Graafian having oocyte blocked at, or oocyte 1, which is blocked there. So just before ovulation, the meiosis is resumed, and now it changes into oocyte 2 for or to be released as oocyte 2. Once ovulation occurs and the release takes place, now we can't say it's a follicle anymore. Follicle containing oocyte, rupturing, releasing of oocyte, now it's not a follicle. So we have to say that there is a transformation from follicular cells into luteal cells. Now it becomes a yellow body made up of luteal cells, and that's why we have to call the phase which is after ovulation or post ovulatory phase, we call it as luteal phase, characterized by having a corpus luteum. So this corpus luteum, also we have to mention something very important. If fertilization takes place, this corpus luteum has to keep its size. But if fertilization doesn't take place, the corpus luteum has to degenerate and to become smaller in size, to become something known as white albumin, and it degenerates and disappear at the end of the cycle. So, in order to group our ideas again, we have two cycles, the endometrial cycle and the ovarian cycle. The ovary controls the endometrium, the modifications of the endometrium because of the modifications of the ovary. So, and we know that the relation between them is via hormone. So, because it's via hormone, now we have to be familiar to these hormones. The hormones, or the ovarian hormones, or the female hormones, are two, the estrogen and the progesterone. The estrogen, which is secreted by the cells of granulosa of the Graafian follicle and secreted by the internal theca of the Graafian follicle, Also, they are secreted by the luteal cells. So, three origins for the secretion of the estrogen. However, the progesterone is secreted only by the corpus luteum or the luteal cells. So, the cyclic variation of these two hormones. At day 14, as you see, and during the follicular phase, there is an increase in estradiol only, forming the highest or the first peak of estradiol. However, the progesterone remains almost constant and doesn't increase. Here I have to give a hint. There is no need to compare by numbers the estradiol to a progesterone. They are different axes and they have different units, so no need to compare by values. So, at day of ovulation, as you see, so the estradiol concentration decreases, and after day of ovulation, the progesterone increases, and the progesterone also re-increases to form its second peak, which is less than that of the first. So, and both of them, the two concentrations, decrease at the end of the ovulation. So, as a conclusion, what can we say? During the follicular phase, or this phase is characterized only by the unique secretion of estradiol. However, the luteal phase is characterized by joint secretion. Both are secreted, the progesterone and the estradiol. So, here we have to look for this synchronism between them. Ovarian cycle, endometrial cycle, secreted hormones. Ovarian cycle, tertiary, Graafian, ovulation, corpus luteum, pre-ovulatory, post-ovulatory, follicular phase, luteal phase. So, estradiol or estrogen is secreted uniquely during the follicular phase, and due to the secretion of this estrogen because of the cells of the follicle, there is an increase or a thickening in the endometrium. So, however, during the joint secretion, progesterone and the estradiol during the post-ovulatory phase or luteal phase, because of the corpus luteum, so the corpus luteum secretes these two hormones, there is an extra or excessive thickening of the endometrium. So, as you see, within the 28 days, there is a synchronism between the ovarian and the uterine cycles. So, they move in parallel, and we say the ovary, by its hormone, it affects the modification of the endometrium. And I have to put in mind here an extra idea. As you see, so during the follicular phase, the body temperature of the female is around 36.5 degrees. However, at the point of ovulation or day of ovulation, day 14, and the transformation from the follicle into corpus luteum, and due to the secretion of progesterone, you see there is a sudden increase in her body temperature around 1 degree to reach 37 or 37.5 degrees Celsius. So that's why we have to find together the role of these two hormones. They help in thickening, they help in the modification of the endometrium and the formation of all of these structures that are important for the implantation. In addition, progesterone has a role in increasing the female's body temperature. Here, I'm covered, I'm done, but you have by yourself to follow document C, page 297, and to read very well the table which shows the relation or the role of the estradiol and the progesterone, and relate them please to the effect or changes that you observe in document D of the same page. And thanks a lot.